Public speaking isn't just for big stages, it's a core leadership skill. In this episode of Leading Out Loud, Rachel Teichberg shares how confidence is built through practice, not perfection, and why even experienced leaders still feel the nerves. Sharing personal experiences, she transformed how she connects with audiences, proving authenticity drives impact more than polished delivery. At its core, public speaking is about moving people. Your ability to communicate clearly and authentically is what drives influence. Hey, Rachel, how are you today?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I'm so happy to have you with us. I think this is going to be a really fun topic. But before we dive in, for those that don't know you, we've got Rachel Teichberg with us today. And Rachel, if you don't mind, for listeners that maybe aren't familiar with your background, can you walk us through your career a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And as far as my career goes, I started off like many people. I planned to go to vet school. So started off as a kennel technician, worked my way through as a technician, surgery technician, eventually lead technician, and into practice management. I currently work at Veterinary Growth Partners. So I did make the transfer out of practice management after my last role. And here at VGP, I've been here now for almost a decade, which is crazy. And at VGP, I started off as a practice coach. And then over time, my job has transformed in several ways. Currently, I work as a director overseeing our coaching team and our education. And I work as a speaker, and I've been speaking with VGP for probably 8 years now, the 10 that I've been here.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had the honor of attending some of your lectures, and you are amazing. You're captivating. And so, for those that don't know yet, today's topic really is about public speaking. And Rachel was kind enough to go along with that topic. And, the more I really thought about it, I can appreciate that some maybe hospital leaders might be thinking, well, what does that really have to do with me? And I can't tell you how many times I have worked with hospital teams, and it is almost always without fail that they do not host regular staff meetings. And I can't help but think, maybe even unbeknownst to them, some of the reason might be just being uncomfortable with public speaking, because technically that is a form of public speaking. You don't need an audience of 1,000 people. It can be your staff of 20. And the more I really thought about it, it's like, I don't know that there's a lot of places for people to go to learn about how to be a good public speaker.
Yeah, that's true. And I remember my first staff meeting, I had to kind of lead, and my heart was pounding. I was uncomfortable. And these were people who I've been working with for years. And again, you're talking 10 people, maybe less. And
Yeah.
just that act of sort of being the person in charge, the leader,
Yeah.
yeah, it was enough to make me feel sick. So you're right.
And you're
Flip
probably not
that.
alone with that. Well,
Yeah.
let me ask you this. Was public speaking, and again, I understand you just shared this story as your first time with a hospital leader, but maybe fast forwarding to you having really large audiences, do you feel like it started to come naturally, or did you have to kind of build that muscle over time?
Yeah. Well, I think definitely a little bit of both. I will say that first example being in a staff meeting was a little bit of a combination of two things. One, I was in a new position. So I was sort of like finding myself in this space of leadership, which I had never experienced before, expectations, things like that. So, definitely first time jitters in that sort of environment. But prior to that, when I was growing up, my sister and I participated in a lot of plays. So we were a very theatrical family. So interestingly enough, I think sometimes those more intimate settings can for some people actually be almost more intimidating than being in a group of people. That literal intimacy of just I can see every single person's eyes. I am one of a small group of people, which means they can hear everything I say. I can't hide anywhere. Completely vulnerable. Now, not to say on a big stage you're super hidden either, but there's a little bit more space. There's a little bit more distance. And you're right, you can definitely lead up to it. But I would say that my background as a child who was on stage, a performer, definitely helped, I think, have that general comfortability being on a stage. That wasn't necessarily something that was like a first time thing for me. So didn't have those like feelings of I can never speak in front of a crowd or being on stage makes me nervous, just inherently how some people have like a fear of public speaking. That was not me. But for sure, I had no real public speaking skills. You kind of think of it that way, right? I didn't take a course on public speaking and then put it to use. I sort of learned on the stage.
Yeah.
I had some great mentors, people like Sean McVeigh and other people in our organization. I had the luxury of seeing a lot of people speak over my career. And so those are all great learning experiences that helped create sort of the speaker that I am today.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think for hospital leaders that are listening today, the staff meeting is a great starting point. You never
Yeah.
know what it could evolve into. Conferences where they're always looking for new material and content, it could lead to that. I remember when I had pursued my MBA, at that time, I was experiencing imposter syndrome because it was an executive MBA. So all of these people were like the finance person, the marketing, like, they seemed really important, and then it was like Bridget from vet med, and no one knew what to do with it, right? It was kinda like, "Well, what skill do you bring?" And I was like, "I'm not really sure,"
Yeah.
at the time. Now fast forward, something that we did every time they met was we had to provide presentations, and what I quickly saw was how uncomfortable even these seasoned executives were with giving presentations. And it just blew me away. Lo and behold, I happened to be pretty good at that. So that was kind of how I gained my competitive advantage with that cohort. But again, something that I think maybe people are just afraid to even try,
Yeah,
right?
for
And you
sure.
you hit the
Well,
nail on the head with vulnerability.
yeah. It is it's hard to be up there. It's
Mhm.
hard to be that person who is leading a group, right? Whether that be in a staff meeting setting where we're really just trying to get through an agenda, or even if we're trying to build something together. There's ownership in being that presenter. There's sort of responsibility associated with that. So I do think that it can be incredibly overwhelming for people, even with the people that they work with every single day, 9 to 5, every day of the year for many years. That discomfort is really just our bodies telling us, like, this is something we've never done before. Our body's job is to tell us where there's danger.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our body's registering our modern day danger as, in this case, getting in front of a group of people and saying what you have to say. And so I think that just some of like recognizing that discomfort, and also, yes, I mean, leaning in. It's obviously very easy to take an easier path to say, all right, well, maybe we don't need to meet. Maybe this can be an email. Maybe someone else can take ownership.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of power when you step into that discomfort, even in the case of a staff meeting, which I agree with you is a great starting point to getting into potentially a career in vet med, or even just an interest, right? A sort of hobby almost to
Yeah.
go speak at local conferences or eventually national conferences. Every single opportunity that you have to be in front of a group of people will start to build that skill set and that comfort in doing that to eventually maybe more people, bigger audiences, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Can you think of a moment early in your speaking career that may have shaped how you show up today?
yeah, I think initially I was somebody who, as just generally, I was coming into my role at VGP, and after leaving practice, I think I agree with you, a little bit of that imposter syndrome. And so part of that meant that I was definitely keeping some walls up. When I first started speaking, it was very practical. I started off doing things like pretty much talking about one very specific thing, like proven process was literally the first topic I ever spoke about at VGP. Very tangible, very specific, literally kind of formulaic. So it's very straightforward. When I went into then our emotional intelligence workshop, so I kind of did that for a little bit. And then I asked if I could speak at that one. That was really the turning point for me, because I felt like if I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence, and
Mhm.
with that, right, comes feeling, self awareness, self management, all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
I needed to embrace a piece of that emotional intelligence competencies, I guess is the right word, and become more transparent, more vulnerable, right? It's not enough to just talk about emotional intelligence as, oh, yes, highly emotional intelligent people do this. I wanted to model that behavior. So
Mhm.
for me, that actually meant sharing that I have lupus. That was one of those things I wanted to share with a group of people. I had never told anybody before. Professionally, up until that point, it was something I felt like I needed to hide, something I felt might be judged for, whatever. All of those, misconceptions I had about myself and what it meant or whatever. I was still working through that at the time. This is a long time ago now. And so I made that decision where, in order to really feel like I'm doing this content justice and being transparent, I had to share that piece of my journey because the reason why I started my emotional intelligence journey was because of when I was diagnosed with lupus. And so I really felt like I couldn't get there with the audience without sharing that very important piece of the puzzle. So at the time, I mean, imagine sort of that's the moment where I decided to tell everybody, like, this is something that I live with, and wasn't a big deal, right? The world didn't collapse, like nothing happened. It just
Mhm.
was a difficult moment for me, but definitely a pivotal moment because it was that moment where I allowed myself to truly let myself be completely vulnerable, know what's really happening behind these kind of steel walls I can sometimes put up, and really just set that stage for if I'm going to be here, if I'm going to be supporting people on their emotional intelligence journey, leadership journey, a piece of that is going to come from me showing that it's safe and it's okay. And in order to do that, I wanted to really model that for them real time.
Yeah.
So that changed everything. I think once I was able to do that and kind of break down that vulnerability wall, after that, it became a lot easier to share. That was the thing I felt like I needed to hide. So once that's out there in the universe
Right.
now I feel like I can really just like, again, set the path for just transparency and authenticity.
Yeah. That's amazing. What about reading the room? So, speaking about emotional intelligence and social literacy, right? How do you read the room when you're on stage, especially if you feel like the audience is disengaged or resistant? How do you course correct that?
Yeah. I think a big piece of it, especially if people are starting to speak, is to be aware enough to pick up on that. I do think that in itself is a skill because I think sometimes, especially if you're new to speaking, you get very caught up in what you're doing and not necessarily what you're here to do. And what you're here to do is to engage with your participants, right? To be that guide for them to get something at the end of it, not just to hear me say words in order to do something. So, that awareness of the audience, exactly what you said, is so critical to be able to pick up on what that actually looks like and feels like. When I see that there might be some members of the audience that are disengaged, I think it's easy as anybody would to feel that initial twinge of like, I'm not doing well enough, I'm not interesting enough, this isn't landing the way that I want. And in my experience, generally speaking, instead of locking in on that one person, to really take a look around and to really just recognize it's okay, right? Like, it's okay if not everybody is here for this. We don't even know what everyone's circumstances are, especially in vet med. Half of people that show up are not really even able to disconnect from their work. And so I've seen people on computers while they're at presentations and, they're answering text messages, which is a reality of our world. So expecting sometimes this perfect audience where there's eye contact and smiling and laughter at all the right places and all that stuff, it might not happen. So my first piece of advice is to not get stuck on potentially the minority of people who might not be with you
Yeah.
and to really focus on those people who are super engaged. And this will probably tie to other things we'll talk about, but in your preparation, if you're doing all that work to feel like you are an expert on that stage, that with or without your deck, you kind of have an idea of what you're talking about, that you know that content well enough, and that ability to pivot. Do they need a break?
Yeah.
Do I need a break?
Yeah.
Is it maybe time to cut to our activity a little bit sooner than I had thought? And to kind of be in a place where you can feel like you can adapt to the room a little bit and maybe use that time to chit chat with the people in the room, get a feel for what it is. Or maybe that could be a chance for Q&A. Like, do we maybe just need a moment to just reconnect with each other? Maybe what I'm saying isn't landing. So maybe asking the audience a question to kind of pick up where they are. So there's definitely some techniques to that, but most often I would probably say it's likely not everybody in the room isn't really feeling what you're saying or they're not picking it up. It's sometimes we just feel like that small minority is a lot louder than it might actually be.
And it's always the one in the front.
It's exactly.
You're like, what?
Yeah, because you know what? That's it. It's easy to get stuck with, I'm gonna win this person over. But
Right.
when that happens, all you're doing is distracting yourself. You're focused on the wrong person. Okay, so there's one person in the room who's not feeling you, but what about the other 30 people who think you're amazing? And now you're doing them a disservice because you're distracted by trying to get this one person on board. So if you focus that attention on those people that are making that eye contact with you, that are nodding along to the things that you're saying, you're going to feel incredible, right? And that sort of helps kind of drive the momentum of a good presentation.
I want to highlight something you mentioned, and I'm thinking this more appropriate for situations where there is facilitated learning. So longer than like a 30-minute or 60-minute presentation, right? Take breaks and force breaks. I think that that gets lost on leaders a lot. And I get it because it's like we have so much to get through. You want to
Mhm.
push through it and power through with the team. If the energy is low, I do think you are the one that has to say, okay, like everyone stand up. And that used to be something, I would host quarterly meetings with my teams. And so these are like 2-day, all day long meetings. And like any adult is going to get antsy in their seat. And the one requirement I would make is when we have our break, you have to get up and get out of your seat. I don't care what
Yes.
you do, but you cannot stay there and like jump on your computer and try to do work really quick because you're not giving your body a break and
Mhm.
you need it. So I would say just shake it out so that you can come back and kind of be refocused. I just wanted to highlight it because again, I've seen it too many times that and then leaders are mad that people aren't retaining what they kind of shoved down the team's throats and it's like, well, they didn't have the capacity anymore. They were tired.
Yeah. It's definitely a piece of that. And to recognize that and pushing it through, you can do it, but they're not going to hear you. They're not going to remember it. So it's like one of those things where you have to kind of figure out what your priorities are. Is your priority to just say all the things you plan to say? Or is your priority to either make a lasting impression? Is it to get them to be motivated to do something? What was the goal? And how can I wrap it up and make sure that we're ending in a place before I completely undo everything else? And I agree with you. Look, if I'm going to an event where the expectation is I'm giving a 90-minute presentation, I get that that's
Sure.
right. I'm going to be speaking for 90 minutes. But to your point, learning about adult learners and what the capacity is and how to maintain that mental engagement and
Mhm.
not just physically being in a seat is going to be really critical.
Yeah, I agree. In your opinion, with your experience, what do you feel separates a good speaker from a truly impactful one?
It's a great question. I think that a lot of people are great speakers, and you know those special ones when you see them. I think Sean McVay is one of those speakers. He was for me when I was in practice. I saw him speak. Simon Sinek, when he gets on a stage, you listen. I think a lot of that has to do with one sort of a stage presence and charisma. I think that that's a piece of it. And the reason why I think that's important is because everybody has that. And I think that people think you're either born with that or you're not. And again, I think a lot of that comes through transparency and authenticity
Mm,
and a general comfort in being in front of a group of people, which of
sure,
course builds over time. I'm sure if we watch Simon Sinek or Sean McVay's first presentation they ever gave, right, it's going to look a lot different than where they are today.
sure.
And a lot of that was sort of finding that personality.
Mm,
Imagine a comedian, anybody that would get up on a stage. You sort of like, you're there. This is who I am. This is how I'm presenting myself. But again, it's sort of a performance also.
yeah,
A lot of what we're trying to do is engage an audience, keep them captivated. And so, whether we're an actor, a speaker, a comedian, that's essentially part of our goal. We want the audience to be interested in what we're saying
mhm,
and to stay, like you said, engaged, wanting to stay to the end, wanting to listen, wanting to take notes, nodding along, all those sort of signs that are saying, like, I'm here with you. So I think a piece of that is showing up as yourself. If you're showing up in this way of, I am expected to do X as a presenter, I think that that stands in your way. That stood in my way for a long time. And I think that's why, for me, when I sort of broke that wall down and was like, I'm just going to be myself, I think that that made things a lot easier for me. Then
mhm,
I wasn't so caught up in what a presenter should do or should act like.
sure.
And I was able to just be myself. And even to the point of dressing the way you feel comfortable.
Mm,
So for me, very similarly, I felt like in my brain, a presenter should wear heels. Nobody said I had to. That was just a myth I made up in my head about that
right.
this expectation of what someone in authority, a speaker. That's integrated. There's a lot of people on a stage that do that, and that's great for them.
Sure.
I happen to be somebody who is very uncomfortable in heels. And if I'm up on a stage in heels, I am thinking more about my feet than I am what I'm doing
Yeah.
because my feet aren't feeling good. And it's very distracting when you're uncomfortable, kind of going back to what you're comfortable in. So, how can I show up in myself as in all respects? Again, obviously, there's sort of like expectations still about professionalism, all those, of course, and we'll check all those boxes. But
Mhm.
that's sort of even that perfect example. It's like, how can I show up as my most authentic self? And a piece of that could even be something as simple as like, what kind of shoes am I wearing? Do I feel good on stage? Am I going to be self conscious about
Yeah.
what I'm wearing? How can I be an exceptional speaker if my brain is distracted by, oh, the shirt's too tight or this or that? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, even just letting go of a lot of that stuff and being authentically you, finding the way that you can show up as your most authentic self, I think that's great. And also, I think not trying to be anyone else is a big one. There's a lot of really great speakers out there, but they're them and you're you, and both things are great. And I think finding not necessarily doing exactly what they're doing, but figuring out maybe how they're doing it or what it is that's so captivating to you, like you said, how does that recreate in me? What does that look like? So, if Sean is incredibly vulnerable in his personal life, right? I obviously don't share his stories, but it's a good example for me to be like, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity to do more storytelling about my personal life. And again, it's not about the actual content. It's what are some of these tactics that are being used that seem to get the audience to lean in.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I agree. I think if you are inauthentic, trying to emulate someone else, the audience picks it up,
Yeah.
right? And so truly just showing up as who you are and owning that, I do think helps command the room. People
Yeah.
appreciate that. What advice would you give someone who feels like they want to do this, that, they have something to say. Maybe it's material for an upcoming conference that they were like, if I had the opportunity, that would be amazing. And I feel like this is such an important message, but they don't feel confident in saying it publicly. What could they do today or at home to maybe help them prepare for that?
I'd say to just get started, get the ideas out of your head. If you have something to say, let's start putting something together. Even if that means I'm going to write it down in an article first and
Mhm.
maybe see what the feedback is on it, or put together a presentation for my own team.
Mhm.
I think that typically every practice I've ever worked with loves when the staff are the people who are presenting
Yeah.
to the team. And so even just to just get it out, get the ideas flowing, start thinking about how you would present it,
Mhm.
doing it in a safe space, friends and family. Again, practicing, practicing, practicing. And eventually you're going to have to just do the thing, right? If that's where you want to go, I think that for a first time sort of speaker in that space, it will always probably feel a little uncomfortable. This is new and there's excitement in that discomfort also.
Mhm.
And you're just going to have to kind of push through that discomfort a little bit. I will say, I think that one of my biggest pieces of advice, though, for speakers in general, whether you're a new speaker or not, is to not led on in the presentation that you're nervous, that you're uncomfortable, that you're not prepared, that you're all the things. Because I also think that a lot of times speakers do themselves a disservice by letting the audience know that this isn't going to be a good presentation. Oh, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Okay, well, I'm in the audience. So what are you telling? You're telling me this isn't going to be good, or you're not at your peak level.
Right.
And so I think that's something that we often, because it fits into transparency and authenticity, sometimes we overshare. And
Mhm.
I think one of the things actually Conan O'Brien said, I think it was when he was on the Hot Ones episode, he was like actively guzzling like very hot, hot, hot. The question came at him about, how do you handle potentially like a guest that it's just sort of not landing with the audience? And he said something I think is very true for speakers, which is like, you don't want to tell your audience they're getting a bad show because they're here for a good show.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they won't know that they're not, quote, getting a good show. They
Yeah.
don't know that you're nervous to the point of nausea. They don't know that your heart's beating out of your chest. They don't know that you didn't sleep last night. They don't need to know.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes we want to share to sort of almost give ourselves grace to be like, hey, audience, I'm a little nervous. So, right. So be kind to me. They
Mhm.
don't need that. right? Show up as yourself, show up confident, and just do that thing. So I think after all that prep, again, getting it on paper, creating that slide deck, giving it to a team as a presentation.
Mm.
Maybe there's a little local practice managers group or even a VMA group. Like slowly build it over time, get some feedback on it, get more comfortable. And then when you're ready for that big stage, you're ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. Along those lines, I would add the audience doesn't know what you were planning on saying. And like my biggest cringe is when somebody who's observably nervous says, like, oh, I lost my train of thought.
Uh-huh.
And I would suggest just keep going or skip ahead. Even if that one moment, the audience will be like, wait, did they finish their sentence? You just keep going like you did and you continue, right? Because again, I don't know what you were planning on. Maybe I misheard you, but
Exactly.
don't make it obvious to your
Right.
point and
Yeah.
share that. And also, I learned this the hard way. Thankfully, I was prepared enough that it didn't kill me. I was at a national conference. The setup for the presentation, you can never 100% trust the setup,
Mm.
meaning I could not access my notes for the presentation when I was giving it.
Yep.
So don't put so much info in your notes that you can't talk if you, for some reason, cannot access that information. And also, don't put so much info on your slides that you're
Mhm.
standing there reading it with the audience. Ugh.
100%. I mean, and just like, to put yourself in the audience shoes and that sort of empathetic perspective of like, what would this be like to participate in my own presentation? People are always saying, like, if you're reading the slides, I can read the slides. I don't need you to read the slides to me. So that's why
Mhm.
a good rule of thumb is text on your slide shouldn't be any smaller than a size 40. Because
Mhm.
if you're doing a size 40, you're not putting a lot of words on your slide. Really, your slides should be there to guide you as a presenter, not necessarily to have all the information that they need to be writing down.
Yeah.
So I know I understand that there's different types of presentations and sometimes there are reasons to have more information. But generally speaking, if I'm giving a presentation about emotional intelligence, let's say, I don't need to have the list of definitions on there. That's sort of my job or a
Mhm.
workbook's job. Just to keep the slide deck as a guide to kind of
Mhm.
give me those pointers, like kind of exactly what you had to kind of do anyway, right? Use those slides as your guide to get back to what it is you wanted to say to keep you on track.
Yeah.
And so that's why workbooks are always nice because we can always give them all the details that they all always want and, for good reason. That way the focus stays on you. You can't really listen to someone talk and read at the same time.
Mm.
It's really hard to look away from all those words because I think naturally we're inclined to want to read them. But as soon as we start reading, I'm not listening to that
Yeah,
person.
yeah, that's a great point. Now, when you're preparing a talk, where do you start? Is it with the message, with the audience, or the desired outcome? Just thinking, how does somebody put a presentation together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I like to think about what it is they're going to be leaving with, or what my goal is to get them to leave with. Personally, I really like to make presentations where they can implement something at the end, where there's some sort of action activity that we've done together, potentially, where they could go back to practice and use it.
Mm,
Try to do that because I know, especially for an audience of veterinary professionals, you're going home, and as much as you loved everything that you heard, it can be really hard once you're back at work to get the space to implement the things that you wanted to do. So
mm,
I try to create that bridge back home as much to completion as humanly possible, just so that way
mm,
it's a little bit easier for them to do that. I don't want them to have to draw a lot of conclusions on their own or come up with their own action plan once they're at work. So for me, I want to think about truly what are they here to gain? And how can I be that conduit to that information? And that's really my goal. So in that sense, I do kind of work backwards is in thinking about what's the point? What am I trying to
mhm.
get them to be able to go home and do
Sure.
or change? And then kind of create the storyline to get us there.
Yeah, that's great advice. In your opinion, what's a common mistake that you see professionals make when presenting, and how can they fix it?
Think other than giving people the behind the scenes info, which is definitely one of them, I think it's just being aware of body language as a presenter. and this is something I still work on all the time. It's thinking about you're practicing the words. You want to say what you want to say and make these great points. And oh, I had this great opener and all of that's really important. But your body is also telling a lot. And your body is also something that can almost get in your way a little bit as far as going from sort of good to exceptional. So, thinking about using body language as naturally as possible, there are definitely like preferred gestures, how to hold your hands and things like that. We don't want to be super stiff. We don't want to be swaying around. Like, there's certain
Right.
techniques that people can look up and they can use where it's just a matter of, again, feeling natural on that stage, using natural hand gestures, but also being mindful of how am I using the space that's given. Think about a performer in any other space. You see people that are using the space, and there's something really dynamic and interesting about that
Yeah.
versus somebody who stays still. So, even something just as simple as that, thinking about hand gestures and body language and volume, pauses,
Mhm.
as much as everything else.
Yeah.
I think that that's sometimes the forgotten piece because we're so focused on the words.
Yeah. I think you're stressing the audience out. That's a lot to remember, and rightfully so.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think that you just have to get some feedback. I went to an executive speaking training and I loved it so much and I learned a lot and a lot of that came from getting real honest feedback,
Mhm.
which can be hard to get. You get
Yeah.
those audience reviews and they're not giving you a lot. They might not be the people that are going to be like, "Oh, she should have done other stuff with her hands," or
Right.
"It would have been great if she landed a great pause right there to really let that whole
Sink
idea
in.
really sink
Yeah.
in." Exactly right. They're not giving you that kind of feedback. So finding the people who can give you that feedback, or again, being your own critic and filming yourself so you can actually see, okay, here are some things I did really well. And again, if you already knew some of those techniques you were trying to implement, you can see like, did I land it? Because I'll tell you, a long pause in your head, you're like, oh my God, it's so long. But when you watch it back, you're like, oh, it wasn't really that long. you know? And especially it's hard to think about that because if you just really made an incredible concept to an audience that you're like, wham, this thing I want you to hear and I want to let it settle in.
Right.
It can be hard to put yourself in that viewer's perspective to imagine how much time, right? That really, and again, we're not talking 10 seconds, but we're often quick to jump and then we don't let that idea really sit.
Mm.
So, stuff like that, again, if you don't have those people around you or a coach or someone like that, to get your own feedback and watch that back and say, how did it feel for me? Did it really emote the kind of thing I wanted it to? Did it land the way I wanted it to? And all that feedback is really just going to help become a better presenter. And then that way, next time when you get to that place, you can be like, okay, I'm going to count in my head to three. See how it
Yeah.
feels this time.
And I know that that's enough time, even though it feels
Exactly.
like it's 30 seconds.
Exactly.
I think that's a great point is recording yourself because then it lets you go into third person
Mm.
and watch yourself. And that's where you can pick up on how many times are you saying,
Oh, yeah. Well, and nowadays with AI, you can ask it.
yes, I know. Well, I was
So
going to
that's nice.
say, if you do a recording through like Zoom or something, download the transcript and that will blow your mind. It'll be like, do you want us to remove the 400 ums? And you're like, oh God.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it
And
helps.
everybody has theirs. Everyone has their word.
Yeah.
And it's something that it does take intentionality to
Yeah.
remove. And a lot of it again comes with practice, comes with being that level of comfortable in front of a group and recognizing that all you have to replace it with is a breath of air. It is one of those spaces where we want to fill all the gaps. So we put in somewhere, but all we actually are doing is pausing. So it's kind of like if you were typing and instead of putting a space bar, you wrote up
Yeah.
or a period, right? That's sort of what it's doing. So it's just about being comfortable, taking a breath of air, which again will really help regulate your nervous system. So if you're already nervous and you're going a million miles an hour, all of those ums are taking away also all that space to just go,
Yeah.
it's important to, like you said, find them. And as much as we ask people for feedback, my other recommendation around that too is be specific about what kind of feedback you want. Because if people don't do this for a living, they're not speakers, they don't train people on speaking, they might not know what to look for. So if you're purposefully working on removing fillers, if you're
Mhm.
purposefully working on changing your body language, tell someone, I want you to really focus and give me feedback on how I'm using my body language, how I'm using my volume,
Mhm.
how my pacing is, how my fillers are. And maybe not all of those things at once,
Yeah,
but that way they can be more intentional about what they're really looking for.
right. Versus like, "Oh, I hated your outfit."
Yeah. Why weren't you in heels?
That's right. You're not professional. Have you ever given a talk that didn't land the way you expected? And if so, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I gave an emotional intelligence presentation to a small group of people. And I honestly, the intentionality around it was great. It was an after work event, but it was at one of these like crafting places. And we were working with wood. So there was a lot of banging. And literally, they were using their creative brain, which is amazing. And I love all of that. But pairing it with a feelings
Yeah.
conversation, what I could have been talking to an empty room. And I totally understood it at the time. And so the lesson learned from that was just for me to be more vocal about whether or not things are maybe going to work the way that we want. So not that I've been presented with this again, but and that was a lesson learned too. It was one of those things I wouldn't have known it unless we did it. And then I was like, oh, yeah, that's not really going to work the way that we hoped. And so there was a lot of pivoting in that one. And I did the best that I could. But they walked away with a great piece of art, maybe not a lot of information about emotional intelligence,
Correct.
but we had fun nonetheless. But just to again use my voice to be like, okay, what is the real setup? Questions I could have asked, like, am I presenting before, during, or after they do their art? Didn't ask. So things like that, where we could have just thought about that more and been more intentional. So moving forward, yeah, the lesson just being like clarify. If I know sort of the best environment to make this work, maybe talking about emotional intelligence at 8 o'clock at night also wasn't the move after a long workday. Like that could have just been too late for that kind of conversation. So just thinking about and learning from that experience is it's not always going to be handed to you on a silver platter of the perfect environment, the perfect space, the perfect audience. And as a speaker, sometimes, not all the time, we have a little bit of say in that. And if so, at least to ask for what you need.
Yeah.
And if they can provide, great. And if they're like, I'm really sorry, the only option is to do this while they're talking, then maybe pivot how I'm going to present it so that way I can get the best out of that situation.
Right. Yeah. You had shared that with me before.
Yeah, one of my faves.
Picture like a circular saw, like as you're
Yeah,
trying to make
yeah.
a point.
First sanding, painting. Yeah, it was but they truly made beautiful things. It
Oh,
was really awesome. Yeah, had a good time.
let's see. How does public speaking translate into better leadership inside an organization?
I mean, I think we talked about this right at the top is really just about that ability to move people, to motivate people, to inspire people. Public speaking can help bring you there. And I think that it's just a difference in that presentation style
Mm.
between moving and inspiring a big audience on a stage of people I don't know versus your team. But that ability to stand confidently in front of a group of people and communicate your feelings about something, your motivations around something, your excitement about something is critical to moving a team. And those are emotional intelligence competencies that are tied to successful leadership and inspired leaders. So, at the very least, being able to do that hard thing of getting up in front of the team and really owning that space and looking people in the eye and being an authentic communicator can go a really long way to getting your
Mhm.
team involved versus all sitting around a group and be like, hey, I'd really like us to think about installing some new software. Okay. I mean, like we can have that conversation. But what if instead I approached it as a little bit more authoritative, a little bit more really want us to do this because of X, Y, and Z. I'm excited about this because, it doesn't have to be I'm giving you a presentation as much sometimes as it is just about the ability to motivate and move a group of people. And that
Yeah.
can be sitting in a circle, doesn't have to be standing. It doesn't have to, again, all those sort of preconceived notions we have about presenting.
Yeah.
It's sort of about that executive presence, that ability to be in that space, clearly communicate what it is you need to communicate. And so those skills and that comfort, also that ability to regulate yourself when you're doing that is going to be really important.
Yeah. And just make sure you have your heels.
I mean, unless you're
It's
me, they never hurt.
it's so cute. I love it. There in grad school, I had a friend who for the presentation, so we would wear just regular, it was business casual, right?
Yeah.
But he always brought like a suit jacket for when he would present, and then it became a thing, right?
Yeah.
That it's like go time.
Yes.
So no, I get it. I'm just teasing.
No, I'm very happy in my flats. Like,
What does speaking give you personally that nothing else in your career does?
that's a real great question. It is a very special thing to connect with people and to potentially be that person
Mhm.
to make someone have that aha moment about themselves, about their practice, about a situation, to be again that conduit, right? I'm not doing it for you. I am presenting information in a way that I hope connects with people, that I hope moves people. But that moment where it happens, where you can sometimes really just like see that aha moment in people, or the beautiful moments when people come up after and
Yeah.
say, what you said moved me, touched me, spoke to me. I understand this better. I'm motivated to make a change. I mean, there's so much beauty in that. And I'm just grateful that I'm given an opportunity to just support people on their own journeys, right? To present information in whatever way, whatever magical thing I said that one day that it
Mhm.
landed right, that they were ready to hear it or they're ready to do something about it. To me, being a small piece in that person's journey and whatever it is very special. And I feel very grateful that I get to do that and support our community and just be there in whatever way I can for all of the people that come to see us.
Yeah. And I know you've had a huge impact on a lot of people, myself included, just from my opportunity to see you lecture many years ago. So I think it's important for you to have that takeaway that yes, a handful of people will come up and share, but it's probably much deeper and more vast than you realize in terms of whose lives you touch, Rachel.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, last question. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice about using your voice, what would it be?
Oh, I would say to use it sooner. I think again, I was hiding behind that what a person in a certain role should show up as. And so a lot of how I showed up in my early professional career was a facade, right? Yes, I was me, but it was this version that I thought people needed to see, what I thought a practice manager should do, say, act like, what the relationships I have with others should be like. Again, just I made a lot of assumptions about what things should be like. And so with that, I often kept quiet because I would say things to myself like, well, they're the boss. Again, part of this paradigm I had created in my mind about what is or isn't okay or what a manager should or should not do. And because of that, I silenced myself a lot of the time. And I just assumed this was not my place, this was not my role. Who cares about what I have to say? My ideas are not important here. So I definitely needed to find my voice sooner. Maybe not necessarily on a stage, but just in general to be able to be true to myself. And it goes back to that authenticity,
Mhm.
to at least be transparent enough too to say, here's where I'm coming from, or here's what I think about this, or here's what I need and what I want. And I think in general, being on a stage and of course talking about a lot of this stuff has helped tremendously in my own personal growth. Sometimes when I'm speaking on a stage or I'm even preparing for a presentation, sometimes things just click for me. Then I'll have my own aha moments and I'll have my own moment of clarity. Or it's important to always kind of continue that growth, but I think younger Rachel needed to feel more confident in what I brought to the table
Mhm.
and just said the things that needed to be said and trusted myself and, whatever would be would be. So if I could go back, I think I would just say to speak up.
That's fair. And I can't help but think that probably resonates with a lot of people. I think some of that kind of coincides with just a natural evolution of growth, right? Coming into our own, being comfortable in our own skin. I think you probably become more authentic the older you get because you've gone through these trials and tribulations. And, even what you've mentioned, it's like you kind of create this narrative that you think is how the world's supposed to work. And then you start to challenge it and realize, like, well, wait, no, actually, my voice does matter, or it's okay for me to have an opinion, and maybe I should say something. And I think that's a natural progression. I would also share with any leader listening, maybe part of the reason why they don't like staff meetings, you don't have to know everything. Sure, when you give a presentation, you are presenting as a subject matter expert of something. So you
Mhm.
should do your homework and have a clue. But if you're giving a staff presentation and you get hit with the question, it is okay to say, I'm not sure. Let me look into that and get back to you. You don't have to answer everything on the spot. And I think that's, I want to say, part of what scares people about being vulnerable in public or like with their staff of like, well,
Yeah.
what if they ask me this and I don't know how to handle it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's really nothing out there that would be such a doozy of a question, right? Whether that means, and again, bringing it to a bigger stage, someone asks you a question in the audience and you don't feel comfortable answering it. That's a great question. Why don't we chat after this is over? Right. Again,
Yeah.
like you kind of said, if there's like audience pushback, if it's really not like, maybe you're feeling like it's a little bit too intense of a question, too personal of a question,
Yeah.
that's available to you. Also, the audience. I think a lot of times, in Q&As, we often feel like, again, similarly, yes, we need all the answers. So whether it's your team, depending on the question, well, what do you all think about that? I'd be curious to know,
Yeah.
what has anyone else experienced that? I'd be curious to hear how maybe you handle it. Crowdsourcing is a great way, not only for you to learn as a speaker, but also to engage the audience,
Yeah.
to suddenly become a little bit more of a community. The key, though, is going to be making sure you rein it in. We can't do that forever, and you don't want to lose the audience. We don't want it to become too much like that, but there's all sorts of little ways that we can maneuver in those situations. But of course, I agree with you. Yes, we came prepared to talk about this thing. Yes, we're considered subject matter experts in this area, but that does not necessarily mean that you are prepared for every possible scenario. And the reality is that, most people kind of have to pry them open for questions. you know, they're
They usually don't want to talk.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you're like, "Okay, let's talk. What questions do you have?" Right? And we're like, "Oh, I know you have some."
Right.
So, but yeah, I think that that is definitely a good thing to touch on is just being prepared as much as possible for what might come back.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation for me. And I hope that anybody that was listening today maybe feels a tiny bit more confident to give it a try, even if it's in the privacy of their own home. But I do think, to your point, there's so much value in developing your voice. And that does translate into leadership and even having that ability to pivot on the spot, even if you had a set script in your mind and all of a sudden it went left, to be able to go left with it and not have it devastate the point of the conversation or the presentation.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me.
Of course.